Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining our webinar, Mandatory Changes for Federal Contractor Postings. A quick note before we get started, please feel free to submit questions at any time during the presentation using the chat feature on your screen. We will respond immediately to any technical concerns, and we'll try to address any other questions you have about the information being presented as soon as possible after the presentation. And without further ado, here is Ashley Kaplan, our in-house senior employment law attorney. Ashley has been practicing labor and employment law for more than 20 years. Here at HR Direct, Ashley handles our legal compliance and also oversees the team responsible for researching all the posting laws and developing poster guard services to meet our customers' diverse needs. As a special offer to our attendees today, Ashley will be available to provide a complimentary one-on-one consultation about your company's specific posting compliance needs as a follow-up to the presentation. If you're interested, please indicate that in the question box, and we will contact you to set it up. And now, here's our presenter, Ashley Kaplan.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. The goal of today's webinar is to share some important information about labor law posting obligations for federal contractors and to go over some recent mandatory posting changes that you need to be aware of. So if your business has any active government contracts or if you receive federal funding, you have special requirements when it comes to these employee postings. So in addition to all the regular posters that all employers have to display under federal and state law, you may have up to 14 additional posters that you have to hang at each of your locations. And the penalties for noncompliance with these federal contractor posting requirements are severe. It could include loss or even suspension of your government contracts. So this is really an important topic. So today we're going to cover what additional postings you need to know about as a government contractor, how to determine which postings apply to your business, which of these posters have had recent mandatory changes, and what new posting requirements there are for 2017. We're also going to go over a solution by Poster Guard that will help you manage all of these postings and stay on the right side of the law when it comes to federal contractor posting compliance. So first, let's start with a basic understanding of what all employers have to post, and then we'll get into the specifics that only apply to federal contractors. Posting compliance can be really complicated, and it's actually become even more complex over the years as more and more laws are being passed at a state and local level, giving employees protection in employment in the workplace. As most of you probably know, all businesses with at least one employee have to post both federal and state employee notices. And if your city or county has posting requirements, you would have to post those too. Currently there are 6 mandatory federal posters, and they're listed here on this slide. As you can see on the slide, a couple of these had recent mandatory changes that I just want to make sure everyone's aware of. Those are highlighted in red here. And these were mandatory updates, so you need to make sure you have the right version up. A couple of these went into effect in August, so it's important to make sure you have the current versions up. And now these aren't the federal contractor poster changes that we're going to be talking about today. These are just the federal posters that apply to nearly all employers, regardless of whether you have any government contracts. But I did want to make sure to cover them because of the recent changes. Then on a state level, there are additional mandatory posters that are required for every business. Depending on what state you're in, this can add up to 15 additional posters for a total of 21 federal and state postings per location, again, depending on your state. And this area of compliance, the state law compliance at a state level, is becoming more complex and difficult to manage over the years because more and more laws are being passed on a state level that give employees protection in the workplace. And with each new law, there's a potential poster update where a law has changed, given more protection to employees, a higher minimum wage rate or more time off for unpaid or paid leave. So there's a potential poster update, or a new poster could be issued. Sometimes we're seeing brand new laws being passed where there's never been an employee notification requirement. Typically the state posters cover topics like minimum wage, the state minimum wage rate, state fair employment laws, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, rules around smoking in the workplace, paid sick leave or unpaid time off, child labor, and then some newer areas that we're seeing like human trafficking, expanded family care rights, and even electronic cigarettes in the workplace. On top of the federal and state requirements, you might have additional posting obligations if you're in certain cities or counties that have their own posting requirements. And this is an area where we've really seen a lot of growth over the past couple of years. In some cities, there are multiple posters required. Like in San Francisco and I believe in Philadelphia, employers have to post 7 additional posters on top of the federal and state posters that we've already talked about. And then, adding to the complexity of your basic posting compliance, if you're a federal government contractor, like I said in the beginning, you could have up to 14 additional postings to display at each location. And that's what we're really going to focus on today. I've included a note here on this slide at the bottom that there may be additional labor law posters that apply to you if you have any city or government contracts. So in addition to federal government contractor posters, a lot of businesses also have to worry about local government contract posting requirements. And then there are also additional employee postings required for certain industries. We see this especially in healthcare, for the restaurant or food and beverage industry, and also for the public sector. So I'm not going to get into all these posting requirements today. They're outside the scope of what we're talking about. But please do let us know if you'd like more information about any of these. You can just include it as a question or email us following the presentation, and we'll follow up with you. We'll be happy to get you all that information. So the mandatory labor law posting requirements change frequently. And that's true for the federal contractor posters that we're going to be talking about, but also for the regular state and local posters that apply to everyone. And we've actually seen the rate of change increase to an all-time high over the past few years. Our legal team here at PosterGuard monitors and tracks all the poster changes on a daily basis. And on average, we see about 150 state posting changes a year. And every time there's a posting change, our legal team reviews the underlying laws to determine if it's mandatory or non-mandatory, where sometimes it's just a cosmetic change, or the agency will say that it's a non-mandatory change and you can continue to use the old poster. And at least half the time, at least half of the changes that come through do require a mandatory update or immediate replacement of the posters. And then on a local level, sometimes we get 2 or 3 mandatory changes per week. It really just depends. We do see more changes near the end of the year when a lot of states and cities raise their minimum wages, but poster changes happen all year long. And when it comes to the federal posters, federal contractor posters change at a much faster pace than the regular federal posters that all employers have to display. So for the regular federal posters, the standard federal posters that apply to everyone, there have been 6 mandatory changes since 2009. But for the federal contractor posters, there have been 17 mandatory updates during this same time period. And 8 of those mandatory changes have taken effect since January 2015. And then, out of those, 2 of those changes are taking effect this January 2017. And then on top of that, there are several more expected for 2017 based on new laws that have already taken effect. And we're going to be talking about all of that today. One reason why we see so much more activity for federal contractors is just that the President can issue executive orders affecting federal contractors. And these laws are enacted. It's a different process. So the process is a lot faster and more decisive for executive orders than the process for passing laws that affect private employers, where you have to go through the House and the Senate, and it can really be dragged out. Things tend to get tangled up in legislation and dragged out in congressional debate when we're talking about the laws that affect private employers. So with executive orders, we can see them just pop up sometimes out of nowhere, and with immediate compliance deadlines, sometimes within 60 or 90 days, these laws take effect. And then another problem, adding to the complexity of posting compliance, is that the government agencies do not notify businesses when these posting changes occur. Businesses you're on your own to monitor and track the changes. So this can be really difficult. It can be difficult because the posting requirements and the notice of changes can be buried on different government agency website pages. And a lot of times the old posters remain up on active website links even though they're non-compliant. And sometimes there's no indication that these are older versions or that they're no longer compliant. Sometimes there's not a redirect or a link to the new posters. So it does take some research and some know-how. And then sometimes the actual posting guidelines can be buried in statutes or regulations or case law. So this makes it difficult to find posting changes, difficult to interpret whether the updates are mandatory or non-mandatory, and difficult to determine whether there are compliance deadlines for replacing old posters with new ones. And a lot of times there's more to it. There could be more information buried as to whether the posters have to be posted in a foreign language, whether there are size, font, or color requirements, whether they only apply to certain industries. So it can be quite a challenge to stay on top of all of this. Okay, now we're going to talk about the specific federal contractor posting requirements. And most of these are based on what type of contract you have or what kind of funding you receive. And then in some cases it also depends on the amount of the contract or the funding. And there can be other criteria as well. So we're going to go through all of that for each of the postings and also cover the changes as we go. So federal contractors can be in a variety of industries, and there are so many different types of businesses today that may be covered by federal government contractor posting requirements. That we've really changed the way that we talk about these government contractor requirements. It used to be that we were just considering government contractors used to be contractors or in construction, but now we've really seen the number of businesses grow, and we've seen it expand more and more to businesses in finance and banking, telecommunications, technology, education, transportation, retail, and even a lot of nonprofit organizations. So this is a list of the most common postings that are required for federal contractors. And we're going to go through each one and who it applies to in more detail. And as we go over them, I'm going to highlight the recent changes and also pending changes that are expected in the coming months that will be affecting these posters. But before we get into that, with all these federal contractor posters, I get a lot of questions, so I wanted to cover this. I get a lot of questions about where to post them and whether every facility in the company has to post them. So first of all, when it comes to selecting which buildings or facilities to display them in, as a general rule, for each posting law that applies to you, the posters have to be displayed in all facilities where any work is being performed that relates to the government contract. And this can include any contract-related work whatsoever. It could include support roles like payroll or HR for the employees performing the contract work, or even other kinds of support functions like IT, administration, inventory management, fulfillment, purchasing, or any other areas of your business that help carry out the purpose of the contract. That's the standard. And then within each facility that's covered, the number of posting display sites you'll have depends on the logistics and how accessible the posters are to your employees. Each posting law is different. Each posting law has its own specific language about accessibility, but the general rule is that you have to make sure the postings are displayed in a prominent and accessible location that is highly visible to all employees involved in the federal contract work. So it really depends on the logistics and the layout of your facility. Now we're going to cover each of the mandatory federal contractor postings, and I'm going to start with the ones that have had recent changes. So first let's start with one of the newer posters which was recently released, and that is the Federal Contractor Paid Sick Leave posting. And this one takes effect January 1st, 2017. So this poster is based on an executive order signed by President Obama back in September 2015. And the executive order basically requires federal contractors and subcontractors to give covered employees up to 7 days or 56 hours of paid sick leave each year. The executive order says that employees will be able to earn an hour of paid leave for every 30 hours of work, and they can use the time off, they can use their leave to care for themselves or for family members. The law applies to most federal contractors, but I've gone ahead and listed out here the 4 kinds of contracts that are specifically covered. And this means that an employee has to do work in connection with one or more of these kinds of contracts to be covered by the new paid sick leave requirements. And also, by the way, these types of contracts are covered by the new paid sick leave requirements only if they're awarded on or after January 1st, 2017. So I could spend the whole hour just on these definitions on this slide. There's a lot to them. I could explain more about each kind of contract that you see here on the list. But I have found that most businesses already know where they fall and whether this executive order applies to them. However, if you're not sure and you'd like more information about these kinds of contracts and any of these definitions, the legal definitions behind them, we do have a great white paper that goes into a lot of detail about this posting requirement and these types of contracts. It also covers all the other government contract posters that we're going over today. So if you'd like us to send you the white paper, just indicate that in the question box or email us, and we'll be happy to send it to you after the presentation. Okay, now let's talk about another one of the newer posters, posting changes. And this one first became a requirement in January 2015, and that was when this poster first came out. And that is the Federal Contractor Minimum Wage posting. So just backing up, it was actually a new posting requirement, a brand new poster that first went into effect January 1st, 2015. At the time, it was part of a new executive order. And that executive order was actually signed by President Obama back in February 2014. And the executive order established a new minimum wage that applies to most federal contractor employees. And this wage rate is significantly higher than the regular federal minimum wage. At the time when it came out for 2015, the federal contractor minimum wage was established at $10.10 per hour, and while the regular federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, so that's quite a difference. The executive order stated that every year on January 1st, the wage rate may be increased or adjusted as determined by the Secretary of Labor. So the new rate for 2016 was increased from $10.10 an hour to $10.15 an hour. And when that happened, there was a mandatory poster change. And that poster change went into effect for January 2016. Now, the new rate for 2017 has been announced. It was just announced in September. And the new rate will go into effect January 1st, 2017, and it's going up to $10.20 an hour. So the poster was updated. The poster was just updated and released for 2017, and this is a mandatory update, of course. So you should be replacing the old 2016 version, the one with the 2016 wage, soon. You need to replace that in time for the January 1st effective deadline, the effective date of the new law. And this slide shows an image of the new poster. Again, it was recently released. And just to recap, this was a new law, and the new poster was first required in January 2015. Then there was a mandatory update released for January 2016, and now another mandatory update was just released with the new 2017 wage rate. And this one can be expected to change again next year. And probably we expect the poster to be released in around September, October again, and that will be reflecting the new wage rate for 2018. So we're expecting another change late in the year. Again, this law applies to most federal contractors, but I've listed here the 4 kinds of contracts that are specifically covered, and meaning that an employee has to do work in connection with one or more of these kinds of contracts to be covered by the new minimum wage. Basically, the categories of covered contracts are identical to those covered by the paid sick leave requirements that we just went over. But again, if you're not sure and you'd like more information about these kinds of contracts and whether they apply to you, we'll be happy to send you our white paper that goes into the details about all the legal definitions. The next poster I want to talk about is the EEO is the law supplement, and that one went into effect in January 2016. This new poster was prompted by 2 totally separate laws. The first law behind the poster change actually went into effect back in March 2014, and it essentially expanded veteran protections in the workplace. That was a law that went into effect in 2014. The other law that triggered this posting update went into effect in April 2015, and it's the law that prohibits federal contractors from discriminating against someone based on sexual orientation or gender identity. Sometimes we see posters come out, and they are mandatory poster updates that reflect or incorporate laws that have already been in effect for some time, sometimes months or even years, and this is an example of that. The OFCCP released this new mandatory poster for federal contractors, giving information about both of these laws, and the poster is considered a temporary supplement to the EEO is the law poster. That's the EEO poster that issued by the EEOC. The EEO is the law poster. It was one of the first ones that we went over today on the first slide. It's one of the 6 federal posters that are required for employers in general, with or without government contracts. But this supplement is just for federal contractors. So like I said, this is a temporary supplement. It is mandatory. But the final version is expected to be out soon. It's expected to be released in the coming months. The OFCCP actually announced that it's working together with the EEOC to develop the final version, and the final version will replace the EEO as the law poster, and that is expected to be released in early 2017. So again, this was a new mandatory posting for 2016, and if you're a federal contractor, you should already have it up as part of your posting display, and that should have already been up for all of 2016. There was another mandatory poster for federal contractors that went into effect January 11th, 2016, and that's the Pay Transparency Policy Statement. This posting came out of an executive order that you probably heard about. It's a law that essentially prohibits federal contractors from terminating or discriminating in any way against employees or applicants for inquiring about, discussing, or disclosing their own compensation or the compensation of another employee or applicant. So in other words, this law basically says you cannot retaliate against employees for sharing information about their salary or wages. And with that new law came a mandatory poster. Okay, now let's talk about 2 postings that had changes in 2015, and they are the Department of Defense Fraud Hotline poster and the DoD Whistleblower poster. These notices have to be posted by federal contractors if you have contracts with the Department of Defense that exceed $5 million. These 2 poster changes were made as a result of an executive order signed by President Obama, and that was Executive Order 13627, and that was designed to help eliminate human trafficking by government contractors and subcontractors, and also to strengthen employee whistleblower rights. Those final regulations went into effect January 29th, 2015, and these 2 posters were released shortly thereafter in around February 2015, so they've been in place for quite a while. The Department of Defense Fraud Hotline poster was already a requirement, but the revision that came out in 2015 was a mandatory update. It included new information to help prevent human trafficking. The poster also informs employees of the Department of Defense fraud hotline number and how employees can report, how to anonymously report fraud, waste, or any kind of abuse relating to any Department of Defense funding. Examples of the types of abuse include human trafficking, bribery, leaks of classified information, or really any other form of suspected fraud or abuse. The other poster, the Department of Defense whistleblower poster, was a brand new poster in 2015, and it informs employees of their whistleblower rights relating to any kind of report they make regarding fraud or abuse. It specifically notifies Department of Defense contractor employees that they are protected from retaliation when they report any kind of wrongdoing by their employer. And both of these posting requirements are enforced by the U.S. Department of Defense. Okay, we're going to shift gears and talk about the NLRA poster. This is another mandatory federal contractor poster, and this one hasn't had any recent changes, but we're going to go through all of the required posters, like I said. And this one I wanted to highlight because there's been some confusion around this one, so I just want to take a minute to clarify what it is and who it applies to. A lot of you probably heard over a few years ago, there was a lot of buzz around a posting requirement that was part of a rule issued by the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board. And that rule at the time, that proposal, was going to require all employers to post this NLRA poster advising employees of their right to form a union. This went through a lot of debate and litigation, and in the summer of 2013, there was a series of court cases that struck down this posting requirement and invalidated it. But the requirement that was stricken was the one by the NLRB that was going to be for all employers. There is still a requirement, and it's totally separate. It's by the Department of Labor, and it's part of Executive Order 13496, and it applies only to federal contractors, and it requires federal contractors to post this NLRA postings. So federal contractors are not off the hook when it comes to this posting requirement. And this is really important because we still hear a lot of confusion around this. A lot of employers think they no longer have to post it, but it is absolutely required for federal contractors. Here are some more details around the posting requirement. The content of the poster itself informs employees of their rights under the National Labor Relations Act to form, join, and support a union, and to bargain collectively with their employer. And by the way, these are federal rights guaranteed to all employees, even if you're not a government contractor, even if you have no unions, even if there's no threat of unionization in your business or industry. These have been around for a very long time, and they apply to everyone. This poster has to be posted in English and any language common to a significant portion of workers if they are not fluent in English. That's the legal standard. So in other words, if you have a significant portion of Spanish-speaking employees who are not fluent in English, you would have to post this poster in English and Spanish. And that's true for any other language that's common to a significant portion of your workforce, not just Spanish. This posting is required if you have any federal contract over $100,000. And you'll see that this posting requirement is typically written into any contract you have for more than $100,000 as a condition for signing the contract or receiving the funding. It's actually part of the contractual agreement. You'll see it in your contract that you agree to comply with this posting requirement, and that failure to post is considered a breach of contract. This posting requirement is enforced by the U.S. Department of Labor and the OFCCP. And by the way, I wanted to mention this poster has a minimum size requirement. It has to be 11 by 17, so it's not one that you could reduce down or shrink to a smaller size to try to save on wall space. It has to be at least 11 by 17. Okay, now we're going to talk about E-Verify and the E-Verify posting requirements. These E-Verify postings change frequently, but there haven't been any mandatory changes that recently that you need to worry about. They haven't changed in a while. So first of all, what is E-Verify? E-Verify is an internet-based system, and it's operated by the government, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, And it allows employers to check an employee's eligibility at the time of hire during the I-9 process. It can be used in conjunction with the I-9 process. Through its database, it runs a cross-check with the DHS records and also the Social Security Administration's records to determine if an employee is eligible to work in the United States. So the reason we're talking about the E-Verify program is that all employers who participate in E-Verify have mandatory posting obligations. So who is required to participate in E-Verify? E-Verify is a voluntary program for most employers, but certain employers are required to participate. So for some employers it's mandatory. And that includes employers with federal government contracts. So for businesses with federal government contracts, E-Verify participation is mandatory, and the postings we're going to talk about are also mandatory. For employers without federal contracts, or for your locations that don't work on the federal contracts, your posting obligation depends, first of all, on what state you're in. And this is important to understand because you might have locations that are not involved in your federal contract work at all, but still have to post these E-Verify postings just because of where they're located. On this slide, we've listed the states where employers currently have to participate, even if you have no government contracts. And by the way, these state laws evolve, they're quickly evolving, and there are a lot of other states right now with pending legislation to require E-Verify as well. This is current as of today. I've also included an asterisk next to a couple of the states, and this is because technically employers in these states are allowed to use an alternative to E-Verify. It doesn't have to be E-Verify, but the requirements are so similar that most businesses choose to use E-Verify in these states. It's established, it works, it's a trusted system, and it just makes it easier to comply. Also for consistency, if you have other locations in E-Verify in the other states where it's required. So these are lumped in with the other mandatory E-Verify states. Federal agencies are also required to participate, and also public sector employers, which are any government agency or government employer that operate in these states that are listed here, are also required to participate in E-Verify. So the bottom line is, if you're in any of these categories, you're required to participate, and you're also required to post the mandatory E-Verify postings. Also, if you choose to voluntarily participate in E-Verify, then the posting requirement is also mandatory for you. So it's important to note that even if you have any locations, if you have locations and they don't perform any federal contract work, but they still participate in E-Verify voluntarily, then these postings are mandatory. I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it is a mandatory posting requirement for voluntary participants. Okay, so what are the posting requirements for E-Verify participants? There are actually two posters that are required. There's the E-Verify participation poster and the Right to Work poster, which a lot of people refer to as the E-Verify discrimination poster. And the purpose of these postings is to notify applicants and employees of their rights under the E-Verify program, and also to let them know that they cannot be discriminated against because of their national origin or citizenship status. Both of these posters have to be posted in English and Spanish, and that's true even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees. This is a little different than the NLRA requirement that we talked about. And also, these posters have to be displayed where applicants and employees can see them. So most companies comply by posting near an entrance to make sure that you've covered the applicant viewing requirement. The next mandatory federal contractor poster is the Wash-Healy posting. And this is another one that applies to most federal contractors. It has to be posted if you have federal contracts for goods in excess of $10,000 or for services in excess of $2,500. And the purpose of this poster is to notify employees of the federal minimum wage rate, overtime requirements, child labor rules, and other safety and health requirements relating to the contract work. This poster is expected to have a mandatory update to reflect the new information that we just went over regarding the minimum wage increase for federal contractor employees. specifically for employees working on contracts covered by the Service Contract Act. That's one of the contract types that were listed on the slide for the federal minimum wage, the federal contractor minimum wage increase. The poster refers specifically to the Service Contract Act, but it doesn't have the new minimum wage yet. It's still referring to the general minimum wage for everyone, not the higher rate. So this is one that we're monitoring. The update hasn't been released. And that, by the way, like I said, is sometimes it's something that we actually see a lot, where the government agencies delay in getting updated posters out, even though the information on an existing poster may be outdated. In some cases, it can be months or even years after a law has taken effect. Like the example that we just went over with the EEO is the law supplement. It can take years to get the law onto the poster. Next, there's the ARA Whistleblower Rights poster, and this one has to be posted by federal contractors who receive any funding under the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009. This poster informs employees of their whistleblower rights, so it lets them know that they cannot be retaliated against for making any kind of complaint or disclosure about fraud, waste, or abuse relating to funds received under the Recovery Act. This one has not had a recent change, not in the past few years anyway, and there are no pending laws right now that are directly affecting this one. Another mandatory posting that hasn't changed recently is the DHS Fraud Hotline poster. This is a bilingual posting in English and Spanish, so it has to be posted in English and Spanish by all covered employers. And it has to be posted by federal contractors who have contracts exceeding $5 million with any funding by DHS disaster relief funds. The poster provides contact information for any employee to report fraud, waste, abuse, or any kind of allegations of civil liberties or civil rights abuse, or mismanagement involving DHS programs or operations. Next, there's the Notice to Workers with Disabilities poster. And this one has to be posted by federal contractors if you employ disabled employees paid at a special minimum wage rate approved by the Department of Labor. So this is a certificate employers can get from the Department of Labor, and it allows you to pay what's known as a commensurate wage rate for disabled workers whose productive capacity is impaired by a physical or mental disability. The poster explains the program and who qualifies, and it also includes overtime rights, child labor laws, and how fringe benefits are handled. This is another poster that is expected to change because it needs to be updated to accurately reflect the new minimum wage for federal contractors. Right now, it still refers to the general minimum wage under the Fair Labor Standards Act, the $7.25 minimum wage. Okay, the final two posters that we're going to cover are primarily for federal contractors engaged in construction work. The first is the Davis-Bacon Act posting. This one is required for federal contractors with any federally funded construction projects of $2,000 or more for the construction, alteration, or repair of public buildings or public works. And this poster notifies employees of prevailing wage requirements and overtime pay under the Davis-Bacon Act. It also informs employees about the penalties their employer can face for making improper wage payments or withholding overtime pay. And that can include, for the employer, that can include getting the contract payments held up, contract termination, or debarment for up to 3 years. That's all spelled out on the poster. This is another poster that also refers to the general minimum wage rate under the Fair Labor Standards Act. So it's also expected to be updated soon to incorporate the new federal minimum wage that went into effect in January, and the increase coming in January 2017. Finally, there's the Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Construction Notice. This one has to be posted if you're working on any federally funded highway construction projects. The poster encourages employees to report any kind of fraud or abuse relating to highway construction jobs, including any false statements, false reports, or false claims about the quality, quantity, or cost of any work performed on the contract. And this one hasn't had any recent changes. This poster hasn't had any recent changes, and there is nothing pending right now that is expected to affect this one. So as far as the pending changes, we've covered several that are on the horizon as we've gone over all of these existing posters. Everything we've covered is just what's expected over the next several months, and they're just changes to existing posters. As I've mentioned, these federal contractor posters change frequently because these laws evolve quickly as a result of executive orders and the expansion of federal funding. And we're constantly monitoring new legislation and executive orders and adding them to our hot list for poster changes. But today we just wanted to highlight the ones where the laws have already been enacted and where we're just waiting for the poster updates to follow. Okay, I've mentioned a couple times that there have been 17 mandatory changes to the federal contractor posting requirements since 2009. We do get a lot of questions, a lot of requests just to, for a running list of what the changes are. So this slide lists those changes for your reference. As you can see, we've had a few years where there were several mandatory changes in a single year. And just like with the regular federal and state posters, federal contractors are responsible for monitoring these posting changes on their own. The government agencies don't notify you when these changes occur. Also, as you can see, a lot of these posters on this list just popped up for the first time as new laws were passed or new executive orders came out. You can see that on the list where it says new posting required. That means this is a brand new poster that came out, not something that you could have necessarily been monitoring or tracking if you were just looking at your existing posters. I believe there have been 5 of these brand new posters since 2015 alone. So the point is, posting compliance for federal contractors isn't just a matter of tracking the posters you already have that are already in place for changes. You also need to be aware of new laws, new requirements, new executive orders that bring new posting requirements. Because of the complexity involved in keeping up with all the federal contractor posters, the rate of change, and the severity of penalties for noncompliance, we've developed a solution to help our customers stay on the right side of the law when it comes to these posters and to federal contractor posting compliance. So for years, Postal Guard has provided complete coverage for federal and state labor law compliance, and now we have a service specifically, it's expanded specifically for federal contractors as a result of all these posters and the complexity that we've been talking about. But before I get into the details of the Postal Guard solution for federal contractors, I realize that some of you attending our webinar today may not be familiar with Postal Guard or the basic federal and state coverage. So I wanted to back up and give you a brief overview of how it works, just a little information about the Postal Guard program. So when we talk about our standard Postal Guard Compliance Protection Service, we're referring to federal, state, and local labor law compliance for all employers. So the service covers all of your federal, all of your state, and all of the local, the city and county mandatory employee posting requirements. And these are the posters that we started with, the ones that we talked about earlier in the program. And the way the service works, the way Postal Guard works, is we start you out by sending all the mandatory federal, state, and local labor law postings to each of your locations. The posters are combined, consolidated, and printed in a condensed, laminated format. And this is to save wall space, but also to ensure durability and to protect the posters from being ripped or torn or covered up to ensure compliance. That's a legal requirement. Once you get your initial postings, we take care of everything from there. Our in-house legal team monitors the posters daily for changes, and whenever there's a mandatory update, we automatically send you the new posters immediately at no additional charge. And that's no matter how many changes there are throughout the year. We also provide a 100% guarantee against government posting fines. And this means that if you're a Postal Guard customer and you receive a government posting fine when you've properly displayed the most recent version of our posters that we've sent you, we take full responsibility for the fine. And something else worth mentioning here, to help further protect you against damages in lawsuits or any kind of liability and employment disputes, litigation, or lawsuits or government actions. We also provide complete record keeping. So we maintain up to 5 years of records, and we provide our customers with all the evidence and data that they need to respond to requests, whether it's in litigation or a government investigation, to help you prove that you were in compliance when it comes to all the posting laws applicable to your business. So when it comes to federal contractor posting compliance, we realize it can be really complicated, especially keeping track. It's not just keeping track of the laws that I've gone over. It can also be difficult to keep track of all the government contracts that you have in place and their total value, which ones are active, and then how that corresponds with what posters have to be displayed. We also know that for most businesses, your active contracts can come and go. And that means your posting obligations are constantly changing too. So we listened to our customers on this issue, and that's why we developed an all-inclusive solution to make this as easy as possible. And this is a full-service solution. It works just like the basic poster guard service that I just went over. And this poster guard for federal contractors piece can be added onto your basic federal and state service to cover all these additional requirements that might apply to your business. And it can be done location by location. So if you only have some locations that perform government contract work and only those locations need these additional postings, then that's something that Poster Guard accommodates. All of the poster updates and replacements are covered automatically, including any new postings that are released. Any new executive orders that require posters, those are also covered. And it's also backed by our 100% compliance guarantee against government posting fines. The Federal Contractor All-Inclusive Solution includes all of the required posters for federal contractors. There are 2 versions, though. There's one for general industry and then one for construction, since construction has some additional posters. While you can still get each of these posters individually, if that's what you prefer, most of our federal contractor customers have told us that they prefer to get all of the postings in one combined format, and that's for a number of reasons. First, it takes up less wall space, and with all the posters that we've gone over, especially when you add in the city posters now, that can be a real challenge to try to fit everything on a wall. Second, it costs less, actually, than trying to combine the posters individually. And then another reason, and this is very common, is that the person in the business that's responsible for posting compliance isn't always aware of the status of every contract. It's usually not the same person who's handling the government contracts. So typically the person handling posting compliance isn't aware of the status of the contract, whether it's active or how much it's worth, how it corresponds with posting requirements. So by having all the required posters, it's the only way to make sure that nothing really falls through the cracks. And then of course there are legal disclaimers on the posters that only the postings that correspond with active government contracts apply. So you're not giving out information or creating rights or anything with your employees that don't actually apply. Also, by getting all of the required posters on a replacement service, that's really the only way that you're sure to get new posters automatically whenever a poster changes, and then also whenever a new posting requirement comes out for federal contractors, like these executive orders that I've talked about. And this piece I think is really critical just due to the constant rate of change, especially now given that there are pending changes we already know about based on the laws that have already taken effect. That's not even including what we can expect coming up in the near future. The Federal Contractor Posting Service is offered in all formats, just like our regular Poster Guard services. And that means that it's offered in an electronic format for your off-site workers or telecommuters, and also in a binder format, which is something that we've developed for locations that don't have walls. Examples are mobile service units, like we see this in healthcare a lot, like kidney dialysis on wheels or mammogram on wheels. So any kind of mobile service unit, even food trucks. Also construction checkpoints where there are no walls. Another example are those kiosks in the mall that don't have walls. So for your remote workers, people who work from home, people who work in the field, and then these non-traditional work sites, you are still required to communicate all the mandatory postings. The law doesn't dictate exactly what format you have to use, whether it has to be paper or physical or electronic, but they are still entitled to all the same information as your employees who report to a physical work site. And then finally, we offer the Federal Contractor service in English and Spanish, so it's available as a bilingual solution. And that's because of the NLRA language requirement that we talked about. If you have a significant number of Spanish-speaking employees who are not fluent in English, for example, you're required to post in both languages. Otherwise, it's just a best practice. It's a recommended best practice to post all the posters in English and Spanish if you have Spanish-speaking employees who are not proficient in English. And you'll notice, looking at this image of the Federal Contractor Posting Kit, that the E-Verify posting is printed separately on a smaller panel. And this is done for your convenience, and this is to help you comply with that requirement that it has to be viewed by applicants. So this way it can easily be posted at an entrance apart from all your other employee notices, so you don't have to post a large format panel or take up a lot of room near the entrance. Also, you'll notice that it's a combination poster. It has both the E-Verify and Right to Work posters on the same panel, and both of them are printed in English and Spanish. And that's, again, because it's required for everyone who has to post it in both languages. Whenever there's a poster that has to be posted in multiple languages by law, even if you have all English-speaking employees, PosterGuard always provides that poster in the required languages as part of your regular English service, and that's at no additional charge. So if you purchase the English version of the Federal Contractor service, you're automatically getting the bilingual version of this E-Verify posting to make sure that you're in full compliance. And by the way, that's something we do with all of our federal, state, and local posters. If a poster has to be posted in a foreign language by all employers as a matter of law, for example, if it has to be posted in Spanish, even if you have no Spanish-speaking employees, we automatically include that with our English service at no charge. And currently, this actually happens a lot. There are 22 states, and also Washington, D.C., that require certain postings in Spanish for all employers. So this is critical to be aware of, and you should make sure you've got a solution in place that covers these requirements, that you're covering the mandatory Spanish postings. Okay, well that wraps it up. I hope you found this presentation to be helpful and informative. I know we went over a lot of legal requirements and details, but there's a lot to share when it comes to these laws and the changes and the complexities that federal contractors have to manage when it comes to posting compliance. If you have any questions or would like additional information about PosterGuard or any of the compliance issues that I've talked about today, feel free to contact our compliance specialist, Peter Frey, at 954-970-5702, or you can reach Peter by email at pfray, P-F-R-A-Y, at hrdirect.com. Thanks again for attending today's presentation, and we hope you all have a wonderful afternoon.